It's interesting that, the more digital the marketing is becoming, luxury marketing to a certain extent is becoming more personal. I believe a marketer is almost like a bilingual. The biggest advantage of an agency is it almost becomes like a boot camp of marketing. You get to juggle different briefs. Discretion is very important in driving desire in luxury home sector. Be open to the fact that you can't do it all.
Hey there, welcome to Marketing Mavericks with Indiefolio. Today we have Amrita Kumar with us, who's the head of marketing and vice president at Isprava. Amrita's had a fantastic career. She studied economics, then went on to work in an agency for over 20 years and exited as a CEO. She then worked as an integral part of the whole rebranding exercise of Air India, and today she sells some of the best houses to UHNIs in India. Some fantastic insights for young marketers and also a lot of advertising folk who want to start their own agency. Thanks a lot for your time and welcome to the podcast, Amrita.
Thank you so much for having me, Kavan.
I've actually, worked with you and I've learned so much in my interactions over the years. So I'm super stoked that today people will get to, be in the same boat as me and learn. So thanks once again for hopping on board. I want to take you, Amrita, to, your days when you were studying economics, right? It's not something generally what a typical marketer or an advertising person wants to kind of dabble with. So tell us, how is it that you stumble upon marketing while, let's say, doing economics? And when did you decide that you want to really shape your career in advertising and marketing?
Thanks for the question. It's actually it's a very favorite part of how I started. So honestly, a lot of this started because of my dad. Okay. He believed in story. So he's the one whom I credit to my love for storytelling, art, and history. Okay. And he believed in storytelling and community building even before it was a thing for us. Years ago, he used to work in a company called Jensen Nicholson, which was a paint company. And, I learned a lot of just from seeing him. Those were the days where, for example, he would do interior design classes for people interested in interior design and, and build a community around that instead of just saying buy paints, and those days paints was even a further decision making than an end consumer. So, he believed in building this community of, interior design consciousness and hence have a choice or a preference for paints. So this is just one example of, different things which were seeded in much earlier in life for me. And, and hence I believed in, the power of stories and storytellings to make decisions. And then when college happened and, you have to choose, I chose economics over a business or an accounts or finance because I still believed in stories and economics. I believe then, did the closing of the loop for me on why people would make these decisions, to buy or behave the way they did. So, and hence I went about marketing from the economics point of view instead of, a typical business or business studies or whatever. And and Xavier's had a great economics branch and amazing professors. So yeah, I just had an amazing time studying economics. And also overall, because of economics and dad and all the influence, marketing happened. Then I got into University of Leeds in the business school and then did my MBA there.
When somebody generally thinks of marketing when they're young, right, the usual assumption is it's probably making ads, running performance ads, and working with celebrities, etc. And I think the more they kind of learn more about it, they're like, okay, there's so much to it. There's so much strategy to it, pricing, place, distribution, God knows so many aspects. So, as somebody who actually has a love for storytelling, but also, comes from a very number driven ROI kind of a background. Can you tell me, who do you think marketing is for? Is it more for the creative brain or is it more for the analytical brain?
I think it's for both. I believe a marketer is almost like a bilingual. You have to be part creative, and you have to know your numbers. Obviously, proficiency in numbers can differ from a person to person, but you can't just dream, or you can't just come up with stories, because then it's not effective. And you can't just be about ROI and just numbers driven, because then there's no story to be said, and hence it won't be effective this way. So a
Hmm.
marketer has to be bilingual, has to be fluent in dreaming in, as I say, colors, or technicolor, as I say, as old school I am still a little bit, and also think about the numbers. So it has to be a balance of both. It can't be either or.
Would you say that if I'm somebody who has some skill to be really good with, let's say, ideation or communication, or I'm somebody who's very good with numbers and I don't have that other skill set, would you recommend a role in marketing for them or no?
See, it at the end of the day, I don't know, it's very easy to say that, oh, if you're not good with numbers, you shouldn't get into marketing. Marketing today has changed so much and has evolved so much from, let's say, a few years ago, when or quite a few years ago when I started marketing, that there is, I believe, role for different kinds of people with different ways of storytelling. So you could go completely the production way, where it's lots of storytelling, very less numbers, or you could go where you are on the brand side and you are strategizing and considering how to get the brand there, create brand love, brand awareness, and obviously move to action. So I can't say that, oh, you're not good with numbers, so don't get into marketing, or you're
Hmm.
you're good with creativity, get with marketing. I
Yeah.
think at the end of the day, if you believe in storytelling, marketing is a good space. If you believe in creating lasting love for a brand, marketing is a damn good space. Numbers, unfortunately, fortunately, do play a role. It could the size of the role differs different in different roles, and I
Mhm.
think that's where one needs to figure out and do a little bit of self analysis and figure out where to fit. But there are now, the kind of different marketing roles is of which is available to somebody today is very different than, let's say, 10, 15 years ago.
Absolutely. I often feel even if you are not great at any of the other ones, but you have a good intuition around it, like what would work or how do I go about it, it's enough. People get too scared thinking, oh no, I'll have to kind of be an expert of the both, which is not necessarily true in my
Absolutely,
opinion.
you're right. Intuition is a very large part of marketing, and anybody who says it's not, and oh, I just went completely on data, or I went completely on what my agency gave me as a pilot study, is not telling you the truth. Intuition has a very large part in marketing. In my 20 plus careers, I actually know of quite a few cases where clients of mine have taken completely opposite direction from what their research told them, initial research told them. So, so intuition has a very large role in marketing,
Incredible.
which
um
also goes along with curiosity. Sorry for, just to continue that point. Um, Intuition and curiosity go hand in hand for me. And I think those two, apart from the love of storytelling or numbers, also play a very large role in marketing. You have to be a curious person, you have to know what's happening. And with the changing role of marketing, especially, and curiosity plays a very large factor along with your intuition.
100%. Couldn't agree more with you. You mentioned that you also went and did your masters, I believe, right? In marketing. Often when I speak to people, uh, there's a usual notion that education doesn't matter, right? But as somebody who's been a marketing leader in quite a few companies, uh, how important is it to get a degree for you to even be considered, as somebody in one good marketing team?
See, I think a degree in marketing definitely helps. It's not decisive. As in, like I said, I think for me, curiosity and a love for storytelling would be a better part of a credential. If
Hmm.
somebody wants to get into it, then a degree would. It definitely helps. I won't lie and say that it doesn't help, especially in, strategy piece. It just helps. But it's also not something which people can't pick up. I worked with both kinds of people, people who've learned, as in studied marketing, and people who've, gone through different roles to learn marketing. And I've seen great people on both sides. But in the job market, maybe it does help in getting your foot in the door.
Right.
But I think that also has become much lesser. The job market years ago, where only degrees mattered, has just ended, right? I've actually hired, amazing people in my team, especially the earlier team in Air India, for example. I've hired people with absolutely no experience in marketing because they had a love for storytelling or they had a love for aviation and with absolutely no experience. And they ended up being some of the best people I've worked with and the team was a very enthusiastic team. So I think it helps, but only to a certain degree.
Got it. Got it. Makes sense. I want to now talk about first jobs in marketing. Once again, I think people usually recommend, hey, get a sales job. You'll learn what exactly a customer thinks about your product. Another person would say, go to the service side, go to the agency side. They'll put you under, multiple categories at the same time and you learn. Today you also have the option of directly going to the brand side. Big brands are offering packages to freshers. So I know obviously you picked the agency route, but generally what should be my framework on my first job? And secondly, how did the agency piece happen for you? What did you learn from that?
See, I think for the first job, what's important is what's the kind of culture and environment you're getting to learn. Who's, for example, who's your boss, or is there or are there people which create an environment where you can find a mentor for yourself? All of this is more important. I don't think it's important if it's agency or brand. I've never been in that school of thought where agency is inferior and brand is superior, which I do know a lot of people feel that way, that, uh, you know, uh, it's preferable to work for a brand. I actually have had in to the 20 plus years with Candid, for example, a lot of people who used to leave saying, oh, I've got a brand job and I would like to jump. I was never that. And when I did move from a Candid to, say, an Air India, it was not because I wanted to move from agency and brand. And that was a very different reasoning for me, honestly. So I think the decision of first job is on what kind of culture, what kind of environment, how much will I get to learn, and who are going, if will I be finding good mentors in that environment. I think that would be the decision making matrix for me, right? And sorry, what was your second part of the question?
Second was, about, I think, the advantages of, let's say, having an agency experience. That's what you did in your case.
I think having an agency experience is honestly, it adds a real, like a speed, a velocity, almost like, and a secret power to your learning speed. A brand's, and since now I've done both, a brand speed is much slower than an agency speed, right? So for me, honestly, it's not so much about, handling multiple brands or not handling multiple brands, because there is a case of getting depth in handling one brand vis-a-vis an agency. But I think the biggest advantage of an agency, it almost becomes like a boot camp of marketing. You get to juggle different briefs, you get to handle different kinds of stakeholders. That's one of the biggest advantages of starting or working in an agency, is you get to know how to handle different stakeholders, deliver creativity, but under a pressure of chaos, timeline, budget, all of that. So you become almost like a multi-dimensional marketing person. That
100%.
would be, and I think that's where you also end up almost, and because you handle different brands, you will almost end up like developing muscle memory for marketing, I believe.
Yeah,
Like a lot, I believe my muscle memory of marketing is because of Candid,
makes
and
sense.
20 years of like high pressure environment.
Hmm. Hmm. You're right. I think the showing up part, I believe, is extremely important, where I think the best way for people to learn is just like look at you, observe you. And I wouldn't call it micromanagement, but I think you have to really communicate what you feel. I often feel agency founders, when you probably are done with 1 2 drinks with them, they'll always complain about those 20 people in their company, those 5 people in their company, but they don't do anything about it. I'm like, does this person know about what you actually feel? Does this person have an entire to-do list on what is expected from them? Do you know what you've been messing up? And maybe that's why you're being a lazy leader, and that's why they are being a lazy team member, blah blah whatnot. And I think people don't do anything about those things. So I think that really hit hard. The first piece, which you have to constantly show up.
You
uh,
have to show up. You
yeah.
have to. And take some seriously hard decisions. I must tell you, I've taken, like, there have been some people who've been really, like, I'm very fond of them. But, if they became toxic, or, I realized that they were just not helping the team move forward. Unfortunately, I have taken certain hard decisions. It's given me sleepless nights. It's not a decision anybody likes to take,
Yeah.
but it's important.
100%. 100%. You spent almost 2 decades on the service side before going to the brand side, which is pretty rare in its first place. Often people do their usual experiences and then they want to go to the brand side. um, what's generally your thought process? Like, why is it that you decided finally that it's time for me to go to the brand side when you were already CEO of a very large agency?
Uh, I would like to think that the decision was based on, I was CEO of an agency, but I believe that every solution I gave, whether it was marketing or for the brand, was colored from my experience of being from an agency. And I am, as a human being, personally, professionally, I do not want to stop learning. I do not want to stop upskilling. And I had reached a place where I had thought it's now or never, that I do quickly move to the brand side and learn stuff from that side of, literally, the table. I can always come back this side. It's in my DNA. It's hard coded. I can, but I felt this was the time that I want to build something from the other side, and, create, like, something at scale. And just it was literally a process of upskilling, and actually almost like unlearning for me.
Well, what did you unlearn? When people go on the brand side, what is really different?
Oh, a lot, a lot. I think first and foremost is, uh, when a agency reads a brief, or when a brand gives the brief, for me the biggest mismatch is how, like, the revert which comes from the agency and from the brand case, the solution, how true is it to the brand? you know so that is the first mismatch where it falls. And Kavan, you and me have now worked together in Air India, and I think our biggest conversations were always there. The
Correct.
mismatch to the brand identity, or to the brand, that is the first difference. Because, and I do believe it's also because a brand, like, very few people have true partnerships between brands and agencies.
Mhm.
And that's why, if you remember, our conversations were very long between briefs, and we used to actually make written documents and all of that, because I've experienced it the other side.
Correct.
So that mismatch is the first one, right?
Mhm.
I am not going to get into the simple logistics ones like time, turnaround, and all of that. I do
Mhm.
believe it's the mismatch of the brand. Also, the suitability of some stuff depending on where the brand is stage wise. You know,
Mhm.
sometimes as an agency, you get caught up with a great story, a great idea, but for a brand it may not be suitable at that time. And I think it all goes back to that mismatch point of mine, between the brand identity, the brand life cycle, everything vis-a-vis agency. I think that, and the mismatch could even be as simple as almost like a quarter. This is
Mhm.
not the right quarter for it, this is perfect for the next quarter.
Yeah.
It's not a drastic mismatch, but even that leads to and the second one is also, I believe that in terms of understanding what the consumer wants, um, the agency's understanding and the brand's understanding is very different. Obviously, the brand lives in it much deeper
Mhm.
than with an agency. And
Yeah.
while the agencies can initiate all the researches, I think in terms of imbibing it and living it and all of that, there is a difference which does end up then showing in the working styles.
100%. 100%. I want to now talk a little bit about your work at Isprava, right? I think generally when you're looking at marketing, when you're looking at various channels for an airline, or I think you've done a lot of FMCG work too in your ad candidate. It's easy to kind of figure out, okay, this must be my marketing mix. This is how I'll go about it. Now, when you're selling a 20 crore, 30 crore, 15 crore property to the richest people in India, right? Who probably don't hang where everybody hangs. Their channels, mix, and everything is so different. How does marketing really play a role? How does branding really play a role? So I'd love to understand for anybody who's selling to UHNIs, HNIs, how do you really grab their attention and make an impression?
Absolutely. So I think first of all, in luxury homes, uh, discretion is what drives demand or desire. So it's not as so Isprava is all about quiet luxury, right? We, like, unlike a lot of other real estate who are not in the luxury sector, if you see, they splash names saying so and so buys a home, so and so's bought a home here, so and so's bought that. So for us, we don't, our homeowners' names are never used for PR or marketing. Okay. We never say, like, the top, whether it is actors, cricketers, all of these people, or even businessmen have bought Isprava homes, but we will never see a press release or a news or a social media post from us saying so and so has bought a home from us. So discretion is very important in driving desire in luxury home sector. Okay, you're not just selling a house,
Hmm.
you know you're also helping them curate their legacy for tomorrow. So
Mhm.
one of the things I say about, is that out of everything you're leaving for your children, let's say this is the one you're most happiest leaving for them, so you're
Hmm.
helping them create a legacy. So it's interesting that, the more digital the marketing is becoming, luxury marketing to a certain extent is becoming more personal.
Mhm.
So it's about curated experiences, it's about generating word of mouth through different initiatives. It's about, money can't buy experiences for a very select people behind closed doors. It's very discreet. And
Mhm.
and this whole paradox of, everything, like digital, the world's becoming digital, but analog marketing working the best for luxury marketing sometimes is really interesting.
Yeah, because I think analog marketing today is rare. So I think people really appreciate the care which goes
Yeah,
into, I think, putting something together
absolutely.
versus
Absolutely.
target 5 million people, and you're not really looking at me at all. It's the algorithm deciding who I should.
Absolutely. Why, and while we do that, we do our digital. There is performance, there is social happening, there is influencers, or KOLs being, spoken to and bought into the marketing mix. But
Mhm.
I think a very large chunk of our budget is towards our existing homeowners and prospective buyers and the experiences we can create for them, and giving them a glimpse of the life they can have with Isprava. I think that is where it makes a difference.
100%. I want to ask you this question. I usually ask everybody in the podcast, and I think you'll have a very unique, you have a very interesting perspective because you've done both the sides. So I think we only mentioned this in our conversation some time ago that Pele brands used to really partner with their agencies and vice versa, and the notion is those days are over. Nobody knows now, who's your agency. There's a lot of push and pull. I think the brands usually say, "Don't get my brand." Agencies usually say, "You wouldn't take the time to explain it to me." And brands say, "Yeah, but I have to do 100 things. I don't want to make 4 things a year like I used to." The constant tiff. And I think agency relationships, client relationships, uh, they're getting rarer to find like beautiful relationships. They're always usually taskmaster relationships at both ends, and you kind of seen the evolution from all sides. So I think just to kind of sum this up, like what do you think separates a good agency from a great agency in your experience?
I think uh, I think a good agency definitely, just for me, I would say, gets and executes the brief to the T. But a great agency really gets into the DNA of it and not only questions it, but delivers X more and almost becomes an extended arm for the brand, right?
Mhm.
When I think, and it doesn't happen overnight. The delivery with conviction and not just compliance to the brief doesn't happen overnight. It takes humongous work and effort in building the relationship on both sides, right?
Mhm.
I think what's important is there is a tendency that if there is a downward spiral for an incident, that downward spiral then colors the whole relationship,
Mhm.
right? So it's important to always hit the pause button and go for an upward spiral, invest in it. I'll give you a very simple example. We have an in-house creative team, in Esprava, and
Mhm.
we were discussing a launch, and my team asked me, should we brief them after we finish the discussion tomorrow? And I was like, they should be part of our discussion tomorrow so that
Mhm.
they can start visualizing the campaign early on and even in fact understand the logic of the brief we give them, in a day or two,
Mhm.
right? And that's exactly what I think makes a good agency a great agency.
Mhm.
The client has to help, the brand has to help the agency become good to great. The agency doesn't become good to great on its own.
True.
I must,
True.
uh, like I have seen the same agency be good for one brand and be great for one brand,
Correct. Correct. That's a great
right?
point. Yeah.
So I think it's the investment.
100%. I think you have to really believe in that partnership. I think that's true for all relationships. And I think the moment you kind of build, uh, the moment you both realize, okay, we have to be together, I think magic happens, after that. Um, so I totally agree there. We have to talk a little bit about AI, before we end the podcast. And I think my question to you is actually something very simple. We all know AI is here to stay. We have to embrace it. But in your experience, what is the most underrated thing about AI and what is the most overrated thing about AI? If you could just share your personal thoughts, maybe contextual to marketing.
I think the most underrated would be, the whole using it for consumer research and intelligence.
Mhm.
I think in terms of pattern recognition or analysis or even personalization, I
Mhm.
think it's quite underutilized right now, including, I must admit, on my side also.
Okay.
I think over relying piece or overused piece of AI would be a little bit of creativity. I think somewhere what's happened is it became almost like a hot take or a trend, and then too much creativity is happening, and hence, there is a that intuition, storytelling. There is a softer aspect kind of which has got missed out. It's becoming templated, and
Right.
almost like algorithm decides what creativity is going into it.
Right.
And
Right.
brand love doesn't necessarily, in my perspective, get built that way. So
Got it.
use it, but to a certain degree. Not I'm
Got it.
not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying over reliance may be a bad thing.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's great at doing odd jobs in creative, but it can't be the person deciding what will work. It can't be the
Ex-
person deciding, what's going to be the overall key message which will resonate, because it's usually really bad output when it comes to that kind of thinking. Um, I think we are at time, and I want to kind of ask you the last question. I think you shared a lot of thoughts, a lot of insights, but for anybody who's young today, right, who maybe wants to be a head of marketing one day, wants to be a CMO one day, what's your advice for them?
Oh wow. I think we've kind of covered it through different questions. My advice would be to keep learning, to keep upskilling, stay curious. Marketing is changing in a very rapid pace. So to stay curious, and never think that we know it all. None of us know it all, especially in the world of marketing.
Mm,
Every day something will surprise us. So
mhm,
I think, and collaborations. For me, I think marketing has become a space where if you have to work with number of people, different kind of people. The marketing mix has become such a different, like a different channels that the more everybody has different strengths.
mm.
So it's an amazing melting pot one can create if you're just open to learning, or be open to the fact that you can't do it all.
100%. Superb. I think be curious, be self-aware. I think that's what I
Yeah,
take away from your last answer. Thank you so much, Amrita. You were fantastic. I hope you had a good time.
I had a great time talking to you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. And for everybody who stuck along, thanks for staying it right till the end. If you'd like to hear another marketing leader, please like, share, and subscribe. And a new episode will come out very, very soon. Bye bye.